Hi guys, welcome to another episode of the world famous podcast, Beating the Press, with your two hosts, myself, Ty. We've obviously got Kristian with us as well today. Thank you for joining us. If this is the first time you've clicked the link and you've accidentally seen us, I hope it's not an accident moving forward. We talk about football, that is all we talk about, so it's great to have you on board if that is what your thing is. We are currently in the midst of going through previous World Cups in the run-up to this year's World Cup in Qatar. Today's episode will have us focusing on the World Cup in Japan and South Korea, which was the 2002 World Cup. And with that being said, I'm going to pass it over to Chris to get us going and throw him under the bus.
Yeah, that was nice and quick. Like, subscribe, all that good stuff, as always. Obviously, we've been doing this for a little bit of time now, and we're continuing our road through. And obviously, we're going to Japan and South Korea, which is the first nation to host a dual World Cup, is it?
Yeah. And the first time in Asia as well, if I'm right as well. It was first time in Asia, wasn't it?
Yeah, and also it was like full of facts today. I think we've been reading enough on this. It was also the first time that Japan had actually qualified for a World Cup, which I remember it was a bit controversial at the time. Not so much that they were allowed to be normally what you'd have is one country host it, and then that country automatically gets a place in there. But this time it was two kind of teams that you didn't know that were actually ever going to make it to the finals. But not only that, they were actually both seeded as the top seeds in their groups.
But they were really good. They were good though. They weren't poor. That's the thing. They actually earned it, right? And we'll spoiler South Korea got to semi-finals.
and that's effectively where we'll start, because we always say it when we go through these podcasts, that it's always important that the home nation does well. And in this occasion, you kind of had two chances of it going well, and essentially they both massively outperformed what they were expected to, in particular, obviously, South Korea. What do you remember about the build-up, the actual tournament itself in Korea? Do you remember it being a good tournament?
Yeah, my memories of it are of it being really corrupt, and I'll tell you why. It probably wasn't at all.
Shocked me.
No, because I remember, because it was Italy were obviously, and Italy, because South Korea. If you watch the game back now, so South Korea, Japan got beat by Turkey in the knockout stage first round, so they both qualified from the groups. South Korea played Italy. And Italy had some of the worst decisions go against them that you can possibly imagine. And genuinely just horrendous decisions. And then they played Spain in the knocks round, beat Italy in extra time, last minute or something. It was some horror decisions throughout to get them through. They've played Spain, and I remember if it was Joaquin who scored in extra time, and it was a legit goal, but it was blown for offside. It was a horrendous call again. And then South Korea obviously won in penalties to go through to the semi-finals, and that's the sort of lasting memory for me of that tournament. And it's probably a bad one, but I just felt
not just because it was against Italy.
No, but it was Spain as well. The game followed, and I was like, "This is just like it's like the FIFA want South Korea to keep going and keep because my thinking at the time was because Japan and South Korea weren't really footballing nations at the time as much as they are now. To keep the interest of the country, both nations, or at least one of the nations, have got to stay in till the latter stages, and that's almost how it felt. And that's probably me with my sort of 19-year-old, 18-year-old head on. I'm thinking the world's against Italy, but the decisions, you know what I mean. You watch them back, the decisions were some absolute horror decisions in there. You're thinking VAR, like if VAR were about there, none of them goals would have happened. And I think South Korea have been very, very lucky to have beaten Italy, and then obviously Spain goal would have counted as well. But I remember when the guy who scored for South Korea, I can't remember his name, against Italy. I think he played for Brescia at the time in Italy, and the president of Brescia said he's never going to be allowed to play for my country or something. That was him gone. It was Hwang Hyun something, if I remember right. But he was just like, you ain't playing for us again, you're done. It's like Ronaldo, against England in the Euros, whenever it was, 2006 or whenever it was, 2004. Yeah. Winky, Fergie or Ed Woodward, it's whoever the guy in charge, David Gill. He ain't playing for Man United ever again. He's gone.
Well, that's the thing, though. Like they both played in relatively competitive, if not difficult, groups. I've got South Korea here, so they played with United States, Poland, and Portugal. Now, usually these days, obviously, you'd expect Portugal and Poland to go through that group, but it was South Korea and United States that went through. And in the other one, Japan, they went through with Russia and they knocked out Tunisia. And they went through with Belgium, knocked out Russia and Tunisia. So, it was good that happened, to be fair, as long as it didn't impact, of course, England. Just
one thing. And I always, you're asking me what I really remember. I mean, that's obviously for me, Italy happened. The other thing that I really remembered from it was, I don't think it was a great World Cup. And the other thing was France were horrendous. They carried on this thing of where previous World Cup winners got knocked out really, really early. This one, obviously, they got knocked out in their group because it was when Senegal sort of first time they came to the fore, if I remember right. And then, that was when El Hadji Diouf on Papa Bouba Diop, and you know what I mean? And I remember France got knocked out early doors. It was a really scruffy goal, but
it was a World Cup that seemed to open up. Like, if you think as an England fan, it opened up very early on because there was a lot of shocks. It was like a lot of underdog. I think France went out with a point. I think they only got a point. They got beat by Senegal and I want to say Denmark or something like that. And then you had Portugal go out, Argentina went out early. They didn't get out of England's group. Croatia, Russia. It kind of opened itself up. But France, they were not only the World Cup champions, they were the Euros champions as well. Because Euro 2000. So they won back to back. So it was like such a shock for them to go out. And like I say, with you said actually Senegal. If ever there was a thing where it was like, don't buy a player off the back of a World Cup, well, Liverpool went and bought two. Obviously, they bought El Hadji Diouf and then they bought Salif Diao. But they were really good in that tournament. They had Henri Camara. Is it Latiga? What was his name? Fadiga. I think his name was
Kalidou Fadiga.
Yeah. So they had like a really good core team, and then obviously Liverpool bought El Hadji Diouf. Everyone was saying just buy him. We bought him. We got him for around I think it was about 10 million, and he just turned out to be a little troublemaker, little git.
Yeah, absolutely did.
Yeah.
Go on. No, I was just going to say, so we'll move on to England. And what are your memories of England? I mean, they obviously had a semi. It was at that stage of England's recent past where they seem to get to quarters and just get knocked out every time. But I want to sort of take your mind back to the game against Argentina, and obviously a certain Mr. Beckham had a big part to play in it. Obviously, they got knocked out in '98 by playing Argentina, and Argentina are in their group stages. And it was a bit of karma because they obviously knocked them out as well. And the game against Argentina, what's your memories of that?
Yeah, well, I'll just start with it with the group. Obviously, the group was they called it the group of death at the time. It's Sweden, Argentina, and Nigeria. We drew the first game with Sweden like we always do. Drew the last game with Nigeria and qualified with 5 points, obviously by beating Argentina. And I just remember it being just totally billed as Beckham versus Simeone. Yeah. Beckham had the metatarsal injury just before the World Cup, so it was like whether he was going to come back or not. And then obviously he came up against Simeone and that, and everyone was like, is he going to shake his hand? What's it going to be like between them? But as always, it was professional. They shook hands before the game, from what I remember. And then it was a relatively, I want to say boring game, but on edge game. And obviously England got the penalty. I can't remember how they got the penalty. I think it had something to do with
Michael Owen, wasn't it? I think it was only chopped back. It was against Pochettino, if I remember right.
Oh, right.
Chopped back, Mauricio Pochettino. I think it was against him when he chopped back and he got a little clip and it was a penalty. He went down a bit soft, but it was a penalty, you know what I mean? Then Beckham steps up, didn't
he? Yeah, and then you're thinking, Beckham, just place it, just put it in one of the corners, just do whatever you can. But obviously Beckham does what anyone does when they're under a severe amount of pressure. It was almost like a Stuart Pearce moment, wasn't it? Where it was like a moment of redemption. You're thinking, if he misses this, we go out of this tournament. But obviously, he smashes it down the middle, and the keeper kind of reads it, but it was just too much. It was just too powerful, and you just thought Beckham was just getting
you're absolutely right, and you've absolutely nailed it there when he said he did what anyone else does under severe pressure. You know, he's just stepped up and he's absolutely nailed it down the middle, and he's actually nailed it low as well. If it goes a bit higher, the keeper saves it. So he's gone low, and he doesn't really make it. And then you could see that release of emotion, didn't you, afterwards? Because once he'd scored and he's pulling his, you know what I mean? That's a sort of lasting memory for me from that game. And I just think it was a big moment for him as well, because like you said, you never know how because the media have been horrible in the past for England teams. There's no doubt about that. How they would have reacted if he missed that.
He spent so much time rebuilding his character after that, and then he was kind of a media darling. Like you know, he done it in such a short space of time. Like it was amazing the turnaround that he got with the public. So for that to go out the window would have been ridiculous. But what I do remember, one things I do, what does take me back is the Nigeria game. Now I don't know if you remember, we needed a point from that game to get through, and the kickoff was 7:30 in the morning. We had to go to, well, I didn't have to go to school, but, you know, kids were going to school early just so they could get their seats and get in front of the TV, because obviously the time difference was ridiculous. And obviously we got the point, and then that took us through to the quarterfinals against Denmark. We'll briefly speak on 16. The Denmark. The last 16 against Denmark. Briefly speak on that, and then we'll move on to the quarterfinals if you want. Obviously, it was a game that England were expected to win. We won it 3-0, 2-0, 3-0, I want to say.
3-0, yeah.
And just bog standard win. And then obviously we moved on to Brazil.
I've got a question for you for the Brazil game, because I remember when I watched it. It was in Bull. I was obviously my first year, start second year at uni. It was because at Old House, everyone went to a pub. I can't remember what it was called. You know, on Linthorpe Road, the one in the corner, opposite Old Quick Save.
Yeah,
you know the one I'm on about. I can't remember what it's called. But that's where we watched it. It was at 10:30 in the morning. You know what I mean? So it was like you said, the time difference was absolutely mad. And I remember that game. Where were you watching? Where did you watch it?
I think I watched it in the Union. I watched it in one of the student bars. But I do remember that. And I've looked back at the highlights just before we came on, and it was a brilliant start by England. I think we scored really early on. Lucio, I think he messed up, and then Michael Owen dinks it over the keeper. And back then that was when Owen was essentially in his prime. I think he had the World Cup, so he'd been about 22-year-old. He was, he was still at Liverpool at that point. And he'd come off a good season with Liverpool. I think he won the FA Cup 2001 for us against Arsenal. So that was the time when he was flying. And obviously, then it was just they scored a goal just before half time. And this was just before Ronaldinho was kind of a household name. And I remember Paul Scholes or someone jumped out of a tackle. I think it might have been Beckham. It was Beckham, because they were talking about whether he was scared about his injury, his metatarsal and all that. And then I just remember Scholes kind of jogging alongside of Ronaldinho. And I always thought, even at the time, take him down. And he just waltzed through, done a couple of step overs and laid it off to Rivaldo. And Rivaldo done the rest. And he was absolutely amazing that tournament. But we'll move on to Brazil shortly. And then I've just been looking at the highlights, and I'm looking at this Ronaldinho goal, and to this moment, I still can't tell you whether he meant that.
I'll tell you, that is never ever a shot. It's a cross, okay? I will put my mortgage on it. I'm 100% sure that is a cross. I'm waiting for anyone else to prove me wrong.
Has he ever clarified it?
Do you know what? As a player, you scored like in the World Cup. What are you going to say? Nah, I meant that was a cross. You can say whatever you want. It doesn't make a difference. You can watch anyone who's played the game knows full well from that angle, the way he's kicked the ball, the technique for that ball, the positioning of where he is. It's just not going to happen.
Yeah, you're not going to go for it, are you?
No, you're not. It's just not, because he's just overhit it and mishit it, and he's found its way into the top corner. It's found its way. The only place where it can go that'll end up a goal. David Seaman, he's not in a horror position. He's in his okay position. that is a cross that's been mishit into the top corner. We've seen plenty of them in normal play where a winger's trying to cross it in and he's sliced it and it's ended up in the top corner. That's exactly what's happened. Obviously, it's slightly thing. That is not a shot. Okay, let's just put that to bed. And no, if you're going to put a comment underneath saying that's a shot, get in the bin. We don't want to know about it. And
one thing I will notice about that, right? One thing I look back and I watched it 3 or 4 times because I was like, did that really happen? You watch David Seaman on that goal. There was one person in a wall. I don't even know whether it was a wall. Paul Scholes stood in front of the ball. David Seaman almost blinds himself and he reacts way too late. It's almost like he's looking round Paul Scholes, and it's that split second that catches him off guard as if he's going forward to get it, and then it just goes over his head.
that might be the case where we're nitpicking there. I mean, there's a reason why there's one person in the wall, because it's going to be a cross. That's all it is. He's just trying to stop the cross. You know what I mean? So like I said, he's mishit it into the top corner.
Yeah, but the good thing about this one was there was no kind of controversy or anything like that. We were just simply beaten by the better team.
Yeah, now, I don't think England tried when they went behind. They just didn't have it, did they, to get that? No. I think Brazil were comfortable enough in the end to go through.
Well, I'm looking, like, before we move on, I'm just looking at the England team, and this is the team just before what we considered the golden generation of Lampard, Gerrard, and co. And we had Danny Mills at right back. I can't believe Gary Neville must have been injured. I think he must have been injured. But we had Danny Mills at right back, and Darius Vassell as one of, I think he was on left wing. It was his duty that tournament. So it kind of tells you that we weren't quite ready. We weren't quite there. But, you always have that belief. The Euros before that, it was the one where England didn't get any points. I think they got one. They got knocked out along with Germany against Romania. So we weren't holding much hope. So get to the quarterfinals, get beat by Brazil, give us a little bit of the sweat with Michael Owen. I think that's really all that we could have asked for them. So moving on to your team, Italy. I noticed that they qualified with 4 points. I was looking at England. We qualified with 5. I was like, that is poor. You qualified with 4.
The thing with Italy is they will always qualify. If you watch through the history, like that, if we've always scraped through. So we're the definition of a tournament team where we always start slow and then we build momentum as we go along. And it's been the same throughout. Do you know what I mean? And that wasn't anything unusual for us. And we'd normally just pick up and kick on from there. But then obviously once you're through, and I got a South Korea game, even now I look back at that game and this really isn't. This is probably me with a calmer head now, thinking of that game. But it was just didn't. When something don't feel right and the decisions are going that much against you. Maybe it was just two incompetent referees in the Italy game and the Spain game. But they had a lot of luck with South Korea in that game. And obviously they've scored with about 2 or 3 minutes to go, and it's game over. And that ended up being another tournament that Paolo Maldini, my hero, didn't get a chance to win. You know what I mean? So it was it was tough, that, but it's short lived. So go on.
One of those one of the good things to come from the World Cup with Italy was Christian Vieri. Obviously, that was around about his time, and he was. I think he scored 3 goals in 3 or 4 goals in that World Cup. So he was at one point he was the most expensive. Was he most expensive player in the world at one point?
Yeah, because what happened with Christian Vieri was I think at one point he went through a phase of where he accumulated the highest transfer fees amongst any player, because he went from Lazio to Inter, I think it was, and he's been at Atletico Madrid. So he went to and they were all like 35, 40 million. They were huge. Like today's money, you're probably looking at like 150, 160 million. But they were going, you had big transfer fees throughout, but he was a phenomenal player. But if we just go back to the front three of Italy in that as well, I mean, it was unbelievable. It was Vieri up top, and he had Totti and Del Piero just behind him. It was just phenomenal. And the midfield was weak, to be fair. It wasn't a great Italian team, but it was good enough to sort of. It was like Damiano Tomasi was playing in there, and he was, very sort of, Cristiano Zanetti was there. It wasn't a great midfield. It wasn't like he was the sort of the next generation came when De Rossi and Pirlo came in. Do you know what I mean? So it wasn't a great midfield, but just in nice that game on its own, I felt we probably weren't going to be good enough to win it. Having said that, I don't think it was a great tournament, but we'll talk about it in a bit. But I think I'm just still till this day, I still feel we did not get the right decisions in that game, and neither did Spain in the following game.
I'm looking through. Obviously, we're moving on to the knockout stages now, and one thing that I notice is, I'm just going to read out the quarterfinalists, and you'll notice that these teams are not. It's not the strongest of World Cups. You've got Germany, United States, Spain, South Korea, England, Brazil, Senegal, and Turkey. Now, in reality, there's only really two names that are going to stand out in there, and that's obviously Germany and Brazil. Obviously, we've mentioned that South Korea managed to get to the semis. You've mentioned it at length. Turkey, just a quick summary on Turkey. Do you remember anything about them?
I thought they were a really good footballing team, as they always are. If I remember right, they beat Japan in the knockouts, and they played Senegal in the quarters, and then they played Brazil in the semis. But I remember the Brazil game. It was quite tight. Brazil obviously ended up winning 1-0, but they weren't outplayed or overawed. But yeah, so I thought Turkey I think that was the highest finish they've ever had as well, because they beat South Korea in the fourth place playoff to finish third. But that was a good Turkish team. That
the goal against Turkey, I think I remember. Is it the Ronaldo toe poke? Every now and again, a Brazilian comes out with a toe poke. You remember Ronaldinho against Chelsea? As glamorous as they are,
Romario used to live off toe pokes.
As glamorous as they are, and as beautiful as they play football, they're not afraid to do a good old toggy, as they say. So moving on to the final, obviously the last World Cup that we had. If you haven't seen it, jump back onto the next video. It's really good, even though we said ourselves. We obviously mentioned Ronaldo. He wasn't fully at it on the last World Cup because of the extenuating circumstances before the final. But this time, obviously, he made up for it. Now, he ended up top goal scorer with 8 goals, which is absolutely phenomenal. And like I say, if you want to see what I think of Ronaldo, go back to the last one. But the one thing I remember, before I ask you of your opinions on the final, was the one thing I remember is Ronaldo coming out with the most hideous haircut I've ever seen in my life, and there was so many kids at school the next week with it as well.
Oh yeah.
What were your memories of the final, Matt?
Oh, I mean, the one thing I will say is, I mean, obviously we've not really spoke about Germany because they got to the final, but that was a poor.
Wasn't a great team, yeah.
That was such a shit team. I mean, I don't care. They've got
just as a side note, they didn't get out of the Euros. They finished bottom of the Euro group, the tournament before. Yeah.
We talk about how sort of the World Cup can open up for you, in terms of draw. And I've just pulled up the Germany draw here, so who they had. So they beat Paraguay, United States, and South Korea to get to final.
Jesus.
Do you know what I mean? I mean, that is how. And the thing with that game, the United States game, they were so lucky to get through because USA were better. And the South Korea game, they weren't great either. And then obviously the thing is with Germany, once they get to the final, they'll just somehow, somehow create a game, and they did. But if Brazil didn't win that game, it would have been an absolute travesty. So I thought it was a poor German team. I think Oliver Kahn were their best player. He was the goalkeeper. Well, the rest of the team was so poor, and that said, it was an opportunity for Ronaldo to sort of relive and not relive, redemption for '98. Obviously what happened and stuff, and turning up for final, you could sort of see that. But yeah, that haircut, wow! I can, as soon as you said that, it's like I just need a little thing here, and I'm good.
Yeah, absolutely. But that's the thing. You had, it wasn't just Ronaldo in that team. Even though he did spearhead it, and he did have 8, he was the player of the tournament. You still had the likes of Roberto Carlos, Cafu, Lucio, Gilberto Silva, Ronaldinho, but you also had Rivaldo. Just explain briefly how good Rivaldo was.
So there was a thing around the World Cup. They called it the 3 R's, which were Ronaldo, Ronaldinho, and Rivaldo. Rivaldo had a left foot that was, if you want a player with a left foot and for it to do absolutely everything in an attacking sense, you'd want that left foot. He was unbelievably good. I mean, he won the Ballon d'Or, if I remember right. The one thing, this wasn't the World Cup. Barcelona played Valencia. I think it was the last game of the season. It might have been that season or the season before, around that time anyway. And he scored a hat-trick. And the last goal, I don't know if you remember, was an overhead kick from the edge of the box against Villa, and it ended up being, and he wasn't a striker, he was a number 10 essentially, the way he played. But Rivaldo was just an absolute joy to watch, and he's one of those players that really made you fall in love with the game. He wasn't lightning with the ball at his feet. I mean, he was quick but not rapid. He had a wand of a left foot. He could pass with it. He could shoot. But that
didn't have a right.
Yeah, he didn't have a right. But mate, if you're that good enough, mate, don't worry about the right. Just use it to stand on. So he was brilliant. He was just absolutely brilliant.
Yeah, and he had a very low pain threshold. I seem to remember him going down when a ball hit him. Like, I think it was near the knee.
Someone passed and he held his face.
Yeah, no, it was brilliant.
It's that time of the podcast again. Question of the day, quick one from you, Chris.
Yeah, basically, this was Ronaldo's tournament, so we're going to go with your most memorable moment of Ronaldo, your thoughts of Ronaldo, and the tournament in general. Just any comments on that?
Brilliant, lovely. All right, then we'll just wrap it up there. Like I said, we've got plenty of these. Click the link down below. Find out all the ones from 1990 onwards, and we'll keep going until 2018. Until the next one, guys. See ya.
See you later.